Welcome to Money Chats and Mishaps, a podcast by Fam Brokers hosted by Renae Long, the director and founder of Fam Brokers.
Thank you and welcome to Money Chats and Mishaps. So I have Christine Castley, an amazing human that's been in communities and community services. She used to be the CEO of Multicultural Australia, and I'll take it over to her and she'll explain a little bit about herself. And we're going to talk about finance, literacy and communities today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Renae. I've just finished up my role as CEO of Multicultural Australia, one of the best jobs, I think, in the world. It was just an amazing piece around working in community, doing settlement right across Queensland, settling people into a new life. And it's so very much a job about hope. So that was 5 years, but I've been really, really lucky in that I've pretty much, I can safely say, loved every job I've had.
Yeah.
So coming into the NGO sector, I'd had 25 years of government behind me in the human services space. So housing, criminal justice, domestic and family violence, disaster management, and loved every bit of that. I've seen it all, and it's true, some pretty significant events in Queensland's life, right? Disruptions around the 2010-11 floods and some major cyclones. But even thinking back to, the post September 11 events that impacted us in terms of national security, how people were feeling as a community, what was going on in terms of different cultures and faiths and how we were connecting with each other. So a lot of...
And that was significant at that point, especially with faith.
Very, very significant.
And even COVID.
A part of the growth of us as a community. So that was, I think, what I loved about working in government was, got to be a part of Queensland's story. And that was a bit for me as coming to this country as a migrant myself at the age of 15. Came with my family into grade 10.
Nice.
And there's a story there we can talk about a bit later as well around the financial impacts of that whole dislocation and disruption and how you deal with that as a migrant family. But then growing into going to university at University of Queensland and then going into government to really feel like I was playing a part in, this beautiful state and country that I call home now. And then I suppose where I am now, having finished up at Multicultural Australia, I'm really fortunate to be on a number of boards. So I've got a portfolio of the Residential Tenancies Authority in the housing space, and also Queensland Theatre, so the performing arts space. I'm just about to start, breaking news, on DD Connect, so back to the domestic space on the board for that. But a really interesting space nationally is I chair the Australian Multicultural Council. So that's got representatives from every state and territory, and we're having conversations. We're there to advise the Minister for Multicultural Affairs, Anne Ali, as a community representative voice around issues around our multicultural narrative and what are the really important parts. Now, under the AMC, the Australian Multicultural Council, we've identified for our work program 3 key things, which is young people, around changing the migrant story around skills and employment and access to economic participation, and then overarching all of that, the national narrative. How do we shape the story around who we are as a country? And that's really topical right now. So
very topical right now.
Yeah, that's right. So that's where I am. And I suppose within all of that, and coming back to the things that you are particularly kind of passionate about and interested in, that whole issue around financial literacy, financial capability, financial engagement, economic kind of capability are really fundamental planks around the social kind of space, around how we give everyone the best possible life to be part of the best possible country that we can be.
Exactly. No wonder you've got those jobs. That was amazing. So thank you for sharing that as well, and thank you for being here and part of it. So Christine and I just talked about, if anybody ever knows me, I'm quite passionate about things, and when I really get a bee in my bonnet, as they say, I like to run with it. Working in community sector for a long time in health, and everything from starting up neighbourhood centres to running national programs and the CEOs and different bits and pieces. I suppose I learned along the way that you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But sometimes, why doesn't the horse want to drink? It's not just about here's what you've got. There's so many things that surround finance. There's shame, there's literacy components, there is thousands upon thousands. We don't do something because we're anxious about it, or we don't know about it, we don't feel secure about it, we don't know where to find the support. There are a lot of community services out there that provide financial literacy, and there's general financial literacy and financial literacy that you can take with you. So looking at the teenage and youth component, I mean, we talked about some statistics before. 53% of women don't have a basic understanding of financial literacy. It's our everyday. I do a teenage workshop with some schools and some community groups and that sort of thing. And I've got a 14-year-old who walked 2.8 kilometres, and I love this story. She walked 2.8 kilometres to McDonald's. She researched, and then she walked 2.5 to Zarafas, all around the other way. And she sat down, she wanted the job, and she spoke to the guy at McDonald's, and he said, well, you've got to come back for the interview and you've got to go online. She said, okay, I'll go online here right now. I'll do my thing. I'll wait for you. I'm ready to go. She was 14 and 8 months or 10 months. She literally got the job at McDonald's. Yeah. She set up her bank account. She has 50 to 60% that she spends. Financial literacy isn't about you're not allowed to spend anything. It's about understanding how your finances can work for you. That $5, $10. She's now got 2 bank accounts, one per first car, one per first house. Now, she's determined. She doesn't come from a rich family, but she would be the most wealthiest financially in the whole family. And she teaches her friends. She teaches her siblings. She's taught her mum some things that she didn't know. And she's really driven. So she loves it, has embraced it. But I've spoken to people that have said, I only want to come. Can we just do a one-on-one? Okay. There are services in that do one-on-ones, and sometimes that's great. But as we spoke about before, we've got people that think they're doing the right thing, and they may not be. So people have been put on Afterpay, buy now, pay later. And for an immigrant family that doesn't know, if I went and migrated to Spain, I don't know how their business and system works. I would feel so vulnerable. I don't know how that feels. I've moved interstate. I know what that feels like, but that's in the same country. Moving to a different country, I can only imagine how daunting that would be. And providing people lower socioeconomic status the same privilege as somebody with privilege. Yeah. And there's so many people with privilege, but it's just sharing that knowledge and knowing where to go and saying it's okay to ask. Yeah. It's okay not to. Yeah. It's okay to Google. It's okay to listen. If you don't know, it shouldn't be shame. It shouldn't have that process. Yeah. There's a lot of little hubs. I'm going to set up a little hub for people who are wanting to start their own business. So I've got 5 different businesses that'll go in and talk to them about credit, how you apply for credit, what credit should be. If you've got poor credit, things that you can do, a bit of information, have free financial planners and accountants come and have a look one day a month and that sort of thing. I think programs like that aren't funded enough. Yeah. And the general information for, I was married at 17, I was pregnant at 17. If I knew now what I knew then, could have ruled the world, as they say. Yeah. So financial literacy, I find a really, really key, important thing. Women leaving, so I would have 50% of my clients as women. Yeah. 20% over the last 14 years. It would be a very large majority. 20% have had separations. There's been a lot of people with issues with DV and sexual assault and other things like that. And there is a real stigma around it, and it's how the person and the vulnerability of that person at the time. You don't want to ram something down someone's throat. Yeah. You want to support them in the most gentlest of ways so they can grow and develop. Yeah. And so you're not doing it for them. You're giving them that hand. Yeah. You're not providing everything for them. They're doing it themselves. So
there's so much rich stuff in what you have to say. And just a very quick kind of thing around, the bit about moving to a country, new culture, and it's been a really interesting conversation I've had with many people, for example, who've come as migrants from London, the UK. who, when I talk about how I say to them, so how was that first time you walked into a bank in Australia? They go, wow, moment of connection. Oh my goodness, yes, that was just such a adjustment. It was so hard for me. I thought I'm an English speaking person in Australia and England, I read the same, but there's a whole culture within a bank. How you bank in Australia is different how you bank in London.
Yeah.
So and how do you navigate that space? How do you learn to deal with a completely different, it feels like an alien environment. And it surprises you because you think, how different could they be if we speak the same language?
Exactly.
And essentially come from the same culture, but they're very, very different. But with what you're thinking about, there's almost, when I think about issues around finance and financial literacy, we often think about it in terms of the dollars. So I want to hit that. I'd really love to have $1 million or even $1,000. We think about the money, but really, for me, I think, perhaps from the perspective of the work I've done, I think financial literacy and financial savvy, whatever you want to call it, is really about culture and values and life skills, which then frame your mindset and how you basically manage your life. And if you come from that perspective around, so values, sort of what is important, because money is an enabler, it's a tool. It's not the thing in itself, right?
Yes.
It is about kind of one of those things you use in terms of the transactions. So how do you navigate those transactions? And absolutely, if you have a child who has use the word privilege of being raised in a stable family, whatever else, you can start from the very beginning, right?
Yeah.
In terms of setting up a bank account, so you build those kind of money saving bits. I think there was a fantastic thing that Commonwealth Bank had done for many, many years. I think they still do it, where you can get
do the Dolomites account.
The Dolomites account and a piggy bank, and that whole thing about they come to your school. Now that's kind of embedding understanding that it's one of those planks of privilege. And I just want to explore that notion of, so people talk about privilege, some people kind of bridle at that and go, well, I don't have privilege, I've done it pretty tough. Everyone has privilege, right?
Yeah.
So I came as a migrant, but I have privilege because I've learned how to navigate things like form networks and connections, which doesn't mean I don't have disadvantage. I haven't had my struggles in much the same way you had. You have privilege.
Oh,
so
100%.
That's right. So you can create privilege. Obviously, some people are behind the eight ball in terms of where they have to come to, and that's where the rest of us step in to help out through neighbourhood hubs, through community programs, through government-funded programs. This is how we become better as a community. So let's go back to the life cycle thing. From a very young age, teaching that practice. Certainly for me, my view has always been very much an incrementalist. You start with the little things, the small. So you start with saving $5, $10, whatever else. Sure, it feels like a long journey, but you suddenly find yourself that it's kind of grown to $100, and then it's grown to $1,000. Or sometimes you take a few steps back because you needed to do something. To spend a couple of $100, but you had the buffer, which doesn't take you back to ground zero or even to negative 200 kind of situation. So there's that practice piece.
It's not band-aiding and then removing the band-aid for the bleed again.
Yeah. And it's thinking that through. I love your story about your teenager who thinks about getting a job, but how then does that young person get guided into saying, well, don't just kind of just have this money, it will flow if you don't control it. Set aside a certain part of it, and then use the other bit if you can. I did mention, I think to you that, so I came as a family under the family migration scheme with my family when I was age 15. It was tough because we came from Malaysia. So as soon as you came, my parents did have, kind of a fund behind them. But if you think about, the exchange rate, that was became a third of its value as soon as we landed in Australia. And yes, they had sufficient, but they had to, in their 50s, enter into a home loan kind of piece to kind of buy the house for us to do that. And my dad very much struggled. So the usual story around qualifications being recognised, whatever else, they ended up basically getting casual work. So it became a different piece then around rebuilding your life, around how you then kind of trying to get that, secure that roof over your head, manage the budget, manage the bills, not having the financial kind of consumer awareness, so that when people kind of do come and say to you, oh boy, have I got a deal for you that will kind of make things much easier for you to pay, you kind of sign up to that rather than already knowing what you can tap into.
Yeah.
So then you end up with these loans or these transactions that you're going, hang on, why does that have such a significantly high interest rate on it?
Mm-hmm.
So there's that
understanding
piece.
Yeah.
That's right. The consumer protection bit. And then thinking through, but for me, as a teenager, when I did get a job, it was about helping to pay the household bills as well.
Yeah.
Playing my part in that bit. And
Yeah.
certainly that made me really aware and conscious that your lived experience does inform your perspective of what you want to do to kind of shore up your own security. You learn from that, right? In the way that I'm sure you mentioned that, that you were a young mother, but you learned from that experience.
Yeah. I learned a lot and it was great.
And it would have been a big driver for you to actually think about, okay, then how do I make sure I never end up in a vulnerable situation that again going forward? And how do I do that for the people around me as well? Now that speaks to a sense of community that I think we should all have in terms of playing our part to kind of say, how can we walk alongside everyone learning from our own life lessons to actually then kind of take people forward? And they've got to travel their own journey, of course they do, but then it comes down to that, how do we then have this conversation? And I suppose what I'm trying to talk about here is how do we create that culture of shared financial capability that creates a shared platform for all of us to thrive in whatever we want to do in our lives. And of course, some people are going to do better than others, but ultimately, where's that safety net that we can all
safety net, and we all don't need that. We might need this.
Yeah.
So it's about being okay with what you want as well.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes society does provide a huge pressure on people and expectations.
It does. And, look, it's going to be hard sometimes, right? This is not always going to be easy. So small tips, break it down, except sometimes you're going to fail and trip fall. But, when you fail, trip, fall, that let's try to be the community that can be there to support that person in whatever, give them that hand up. To kind of go on their way, share the information that they have with them. And then when you talk about the whole piece around, being married, and of course, you do, there is that bit about kind of shared wealth and how do you manage your finances, and then the bit about what happens if things don't work out, and also when you end up in a trauma situation, particularly if there's domestic and family violence or a sudden death. And there's a couple of kind of pieces here around... I remember when I was working in the domestic family violence space, going out to a shelter in Mount Isa, and the place was being run by this, at the time, young woman who also herself had to flee domestic violence from Melbourne and had gone to Mount Isa because that was the best way to hide herself and her child, and ended up running this shelter. She was an accountant, and her goal was for every woman who walked through that door, the shelter, to get them financial literate. Her first thing she said, I get them settled in to the room, I get them a hot meal, whatever else, and the first thing I do is I make them sit down and start building a budget. And during their time here with us, I make sure that they manage that. Here's your allowance, write up the budget, you go out and shop for your food, and so I can teach them the financial literacy. Because she says what I saw all too often was that they would get overwhelmed at the thought of having to manage the budget and the finance, even after we get them onto social service support and all of, so that they've got an income while they're trying to deal with their stuff. They just get overwhelmed with running their life. And this is basic life skills.
And it's basic life skills.
So
and that community.
To do that.
There's so many community services out there that support. There's a lot of lack of funding at the moment that I've been hearing places aren't getting as much funding. Larger community services are getting more funding than the smaller ones, and there's always that. But it's that whole of community. We can all work together to pull things together for that support for everybody. We are a community.
Absolutely. And so this isn't something that, is the business of just government or just the business of the NGOs or just, everyone should play their part, including corporates in terms of private sector. And of course, a lot of them do their corporate, service responsibilities type stuff. how do you do that in ways that help out? But in terms of the general day-to-day business transaction, so you think about someone who's, bought a car and are struggling with the finance repayments, whatever else, surely as a community we can find a way to have those conversations around how do you then manage through that bit, because it costs a whole heck of a lot more to actually try to then kind of get the debt collectors in or all of those sorts of things.
Exactly.
So keep the transaction viable and sustainable and you will eventually get there. But it's a shared piece around,
100%.
How do we make these things work for each other?
And they can work at grassroots level or
at a high
multinationals, very much
Absolutely.
so, much more strategic.
No, that's right. And I've seen some fantastic programs around employment, and so Australia Post is doing amazing things.
They've got
in
a
terms
few,
of refugee
haven't
kind
they?
of employment, recruitment. We used to at Multicultural Australia have this amazing program called they still do Work and Welcome. So what that was about going into private kind of companies and saying, how about you do a corporate giving program where the staff will contribute, and so when you hit enough to then give someone from a refugee background a 6 or 12-week paid work experience.
Wow, that's amazing.
So that means that there's a cultural exchange because the person goes into the workplace, gives that person an opportunity, and this was often a piece around, we found the biggest barriers to people finding work was that not having an Australian referee and not having kind of work experience in Australia, despite having amazing kind of background in the country of their origin. And we found with that 6 to 12-week experience, it was like an 86% success rate of that person subsequently then being employed in another job, not just in that space.
Nice.
Right? Just because there was an Australian referee and they demonstrated that they were actually able to kind of get along in the Australian workplace culture. But also the giving piece, the sharing piece, the enabling piece for those workforces, that the stories we heard about how people found that really kind of, I suppose, soul-filling, replenishing. And that's the bit that also then makes us better as a community and a society when we're all
So those stories give you food for your soul, I believe. My grandmother, her mum was an immigrant, and she would tell you stories of things. And when I worked in communities, one of the nicest stories I heard was a cantankerous man, he was always called, owned a fruit shop. And everybody who stole from him, he'd chase with a broom and he'd bail them up. And he'd make the kids come back after school if they stole. And he'd make them work for him. But then they could fill a box up. So he would give them food in exchange for them working. And his fruit shop eventually didn't have anybody steal, but he would have lineups for people to say, can I work for you? And then he would, as you say, he'd teach them on a register, and then they'd go to Woolworths, and then they'd get a better job and progress and learn and get more skills. And it was such a lovely story, and everybody who had known this person, and when he passed away, they said it was the biggest funeral they've ever seen. People, for 30 years, he had been doing this. And people brought their kids and said if it wasn't for him hitting me with a broom and telling me I'm going to work and and he'd pay them money and he'd get them fruit for Christmas, and because basic health needs as well, food, and it's that whole community spirit, and he helped bring that community around. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm not condoning hitting anybody with a broom.
No.
But he taught in a way of his culture when he came over. This is what you do. This is the consequence. And
it speaks to the heart of the community, doesn't it? It comes in so many different shapes and forms. There's no right or wrong way around how you do it.
It's
as long as you do it with right heart and right
Yeah.
mind kind of thing. So there are so many different ways, because a big part of this piece, when often I talk to people around saying, yes, of course, these issues are really difficult, and how do you keep playing this space? And I do know that these are really, there are people who are doing it tougher work, but what can I do? I don't know what to do. I don't have the skills and capability. It's best I don't go there. But really small gestures, things about how you kind of embrace someone. So what this man was doing was taking people in, and he had a shop with a register that he knew how to use that register. And so he taught others a shared skill.
Exactly.
That's right. So, with no kind of social work degree or anything like that, but it's just a common sense, practical approach about if you're going to engage with me, I'll engage with you in the way that I know how, and somehow we'll kind of find our way
work it together. And he did. It was a lovely story about, and so many people would talk about this gentleman in this particular area. Say, oh, I remember when such and such was around and this is what he'd do. And he was a grumpy man, but he was a wonderful man. He had a great heart. And they'd always start with, he's a grumpy man, but he's a wonderful human. And they'd sort of morph even their way about talking about him as being a leader in the community. But there's so many ways and needs, and there's so many needs in the community and the greater community, bringing it in. And I still hear people saying, you know, it's hearts and minds. We've got to get out there and we've got to do this. And bringing people on board to the same journey doesn't match everyone.
No.
What do you think is needed in community services? Do you think there's gaps?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, you know, and I know community services do amazing work,
and they do.
They will always be under-resourced because the demand and the need is so huge
high.
that it's always going to be a piece to kind of still continue to fix, you know. So you've got to get smart about how you kind of tackle human need, how you respond to human need. But there's also the thing about, I think you used the phrase about you can lead a horse to water, but you know you can't make it drink. I'm a big fan of what I call Trojan horse solutions. So that you get people to kind of engage, connect, do a thing without actually realising that is what the purpose is. So, you know, when we were trying to do some work around engaging young people, say up in far north Queensland and Cairns and whatever else, which was for the purpose of then having conversations to them around, you know, around hygiene and kind of how you do the right thing and turn up to school, put on a sausage sizzle in a park, right? And the smell of sausages, not enough to just put on sandwiches already, put on the barbecue, very basic barbecue sausages, and people will come. And then you use that as while they're there, you're sitting around having a chat. Yeah, that's right. Going, oh, and we've set up this community hub just right here. Anytime you want to come and hang out, you know, for young people, that's what it's here for.
And you'll be surprised, 1, 2 turn up.
Yeah, and then they come along with their friends.
I remember years ago, we helped set up and revamp a community hub down here on the Gold Coast, and we did a community day, and we had the sausages out the front, and we had kids from the school come around, and they just kept coming back. And it was great because it made a community, and their mums turned up, and other people turned up, and we got to provide different services, and then there was extra funding, and then there was legal services, and then there was counselling services, and then there was support services and re-engagement, and it became such a great hub and a trusted service. It's having all of those things and needs and wants, because we can't. It's catch and release a lot of the time, because there's so many needs and so many evolving and changing needs in all communities. Nobody is ever going to fix everything, but we can try and work together to make it better for everyone and inclusive.
Absolutely. So you create those moments of human connection. And then which gives you the opportunities to kind of bring the things up that you want to talk about or that you feel could be useful or you could kind of instantly. So, you know, so it is really about trying to say, let's create a connection and a relationship and then build the trust, and that's how you slowly kind of take things along. And patience is such a big part of all of this, right? You're not going to build Rome in a day. This is stuff that, you know,
could take generations,
you know, and you're never going to be, you know, solving everything. Like when I was Deputy Director of Housing, you know, and you know, that's $15 billion kind of asset base, you know, houses right across the state and a $1.5 billion construction, but you know, so that's, you're constantly dealing with the depreciation on the asset, which you just can never catch up on, and you know, how do you manage a thing and how do you get the construction timelines and all of that sort of stuff. But what I could say, I still remember the day that someone came to me and said, we've got an issue with a woman who's got MS, who really needs air conditioning, and it's not policy to have it, but if you could sign a waiver and exemption, you know, that would kind of be life-changing for this woman. I said, of course I do. And I heard that day and I thought, I made a difference in someone's life. Now, I don't know that woman's name. Now, she would never know my name, but
And that's the best way to be, I think.
Absolutely. So you take those moments of, reward about, yes, I did actually make a difference in the midst of the chaos of life where you feel you're not really kind of having an impact on all of the things you're trying to do. You grab those to give you hope and to keep going and give you that strength to keep going. And that's a bit in that journey to try to kind of...
And that's for both sides. So it's not just about the person that is in need or is in a situation.
No.
It's about the people behind the scenes. And you do get that, God, that was nice.
Yeah.
I will never meet them. But you know what? I think I made a difference.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right.
And that drives another person to do something.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
It's enough.
Yeah, and it's what you need to do to give yourself hope when you work in a space where often you feel that you are kind of really kind of just always constantly trudging uphill, feeling you're kind of quite with the shell slipping under your feet.
Yeah.
But you just do remember those hook moments where you did actually have an impact and you keep going in terms of hope. I was going to talk to you about as well was around what you see often with and coming back to the issue of women and financial literacy and in couples. So I'm just thinking of a couple of instances, where a partner has just suddenly passed away, just, for whatever reason. And the number of times that I've heard someone say, and you do this really normally where you say one person kind of, does this part of the kind of all of your household business and the other person does something else. And they go, I didn't know all the passwords. I had to go into the bank.
That is said to me
almost
daily.
Yeah. So there's almost a piece around, one person just has the task and, and some of the times these are completely professional women. It was just a division of responsibilities. You're really busy doing the school.
This is your department, this is my department, and we work it together.
That's right.
Yeah.
And sure, that's what, I'm not saying you don't do that. Of course you have to do that. You share the load, but you probably do need to have a bit of a safety net kind of process about how does either of us access the information we need if one of us is not there. And it really is about, in this whole space as well, the really important stuff that people don't deal with, which is the wills and the end of life things and all of that kind of administration, because all of that is part and parcel of actually
when someone passes away, whether
affairs.
It's husband, wife, mum, dad, grandma, that person that has those jobs, shall we say, that impacts the family.
Absolutely.
And then you've got all of the other catalysts that are coming in behind it. And you're right, they can't access, they don't know the mortgage.
Yeah.
There's one, so I had a client a couple of years ago, her husband committed suicide, and I'm very sorry if that triggers anybody. She had very small children. And he did that, and she literally had a meltdown. She couldn't access the loan, she couldn't pay anything. Her aunt contacted me and said, can you phone such and such? You helped my son do this, she needs a broker to sort out a mortgage. And I phoned her up and I said, look, so I sent her to community services, and this was interstate. So she was in Sydney at the time. I was up here. I flew down to Sydney for a conference, I think it was, and saw a couple of the people. And we all had like back in the day, I used to do, the care meetings and the your divisional meetings and everything else. We'd talk about cases and things. But hers was like so, for me, it was personally sad.